All right, joining us today on the Spurs Up Show is a very, very special guest, someone we've been trying to get on for a while now. He's at In the Bleachers on Twitter, newly employed by Stadium, formerly of Bleacher Report, now with via Stadium. Want to welcome onto the show Michael Felder, college football analyst. Michael, appreciate you having on the show, and congrats on the new gig.
Yeah, man, it's been kind of in the works for a while, and I just haven't really said anything about it. But they did a press release today, so I guess the cat's out of the bag.
Yeah, I saw on Twitter you had the Drake quote, "Real G's move like lasagna," while we hadn't heard of it. So I'm definitely someone who can appreciate a good Drake caption. So
That is actually Wheezy.
Weezy,
Little
yeah,
Wayne
there you
right
go.
there.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, the real goat, we'll
Hmm.
say. All right, so jumping right into it. Obviously, again, appreciate you coming on. Want to talk a little bit of Gamecocks football. You know, we're getting closer and closer to fall camp, to the actual season being here, which is crazy. But want to talk about the Gamecocks. Quick look back at really just Will Muschamp, 2016, 2017. He's gone 15-11. Led a team that had 3 wins in 2015 to 6 in 2016. Took that team and then led them to 8 regular season wins, then a huge bowl win in the Outback Bowl, January 1st over Michigan. Just looking back at Will Muschamp's first 2 years on the job and kind of what people, how people perceived the hire when he was first brought on after, kind of a failure at Florida. How impressed have you been with the job Will Muschamp's done in his first 2 years in South Carolina?
I've been tremendously impressed. He's a guy that I was like, maybe he's just a defensive coordinator coming out after the Florida situation, and then he gets another opportunity at South Carolina, and he's absolutely knocked it out of the park. He's revved up recruiting. He's clearly put his handprints all over that team in terms of he wants dogs. He wants guys that are willing to go out there and do what it takes to win football games. And he got those guys only on defense at Florida. Or actually, he got some good offensive players, but he never could put the offense together. And it seems like he's really relinquished control offensively over the last couple seasons. And that's kind of the biggest thing that he needed to do. And boom, you see success. You see them, scoring points, and you see them being competitive in football games and not being afraid to go out and play a game where they can get into the 30s or get into the 40s. So I certainly think that this team is they're going in the right direction, and this is the right time for them to be trending upward, because that Kirby Smart's there with Georgia, but also with Pruitt and with Mullen. If they can get things back on track, having a little bit of a head start to that rebuild, that program foundation is a tremendous plus for the University of South Carolina.
Yeah, I would definitely 100% agree with you. You mentioned the offense, obviously. I mean, we all know that was Will Muschamp's biggest criticism at Florida. He could never get the offense going. Obviously, no one questions Will Muschamp's, knowledge or being able to, the type of players he brings in on the defensive side of the football. But, this past season, South Carolina struggled a little bit offensively. Will Muschamp finally parted ways with Kurt Roper, who was on with him his last year at Florida, and then he brought over to South Carolina. This year, starting with the bowl game, Brian McClendon served as the interim OC. He's now the full-time offensive coordinator. Will Muschamp also brings in Dan Werner as quarterbacks coach, which I think was a fantastic hire. Somebody with a lot of experience, a guy who's been around the game, been around some great programs, some great offenses. Talk about kind of your first impressions on the McClendon hire, bringing Werner in, and do you think that these guys can turn South Carolina into kind of I don't know about a juggernaut, but a more productive offense, and kind of get rid of that stigma Will Muschamp can't coach a team that is not only successful and prolific on the defensive side of the ball, but a prolific, high-scoring offensive team as well.
I think the key for them is going to be what type of team do we want to be? I think their best weapons are in the passing game. And, last year I feel like they were kind of middle of the road throwing the football, and they had good moments. And obviously you lose Hayden Hurst, so that's going to be a tough one to replace. But on the other side of that coin, you still have Debo, you still have Ortre, you still have Brian Edwards, there's Shi Smith. Like, they have a bounty of wide receivers that can make things happen. And that's what makes me excited about watching this offense go. And they're led by a guy, Jake Bentley, who really is coming on strong and has an opportunity to realistically, he's got an opportunity to play himself into being a name that people mention when it comes to the NFL draft. So when I look at this team, the question becomes, what can we get out of the offensive line? And that works from a sack situation where you're talking about what can we do in the passing game, but more importantly, it works in the run game. If South Carolina last year they were what 111th in rushing, right? So this team didn't run the ball consistently, and they didn't run the ball very well. That's an offensive line situation, and I think you have to get better play out of your offensive line, not just to keep Bentley up, but to have a viable run game because you can't throw every single play. And the ability to run the ball, especially in short yardage situations, if you can get into second and short, it makes your passing game more effective because you have the ability to work play action. So I think that's going to be the key for me is what can we get? And listen, Dan Warner, great. Bring him in, coach up Bentley, that's going to be great. But offensive line wise, you have to find a way to manufacture yards on the ground consistently. And that's the thing that I'm going to be looking for this year.
Yeah, and I 100% agree with you. We actually kind of took a deep dive into the offensive line yesterday, kind of breaking down our position units, and I definitely agree with you. I mean, it's a unit. They bring back 71 total starts. You lose two guys, but you're bringing back your best, in my opinion, your best offensive lineman in Zach Bailey. You're moving a guy who's very capable over to center and Donnell Stanley. And, Will Muschamp, he mentioned it at SEC Media Days. He feels on both sides of the ball, offensively and defensively, but he feels very good about for his first 6 guys on the offensive line. After that, it's a lot of talent, but it's a lot of guys who haven't played any, maybe a couple snaps, but if any snaps, a lot of youth and inexperience there. But how much do you think, because I think a lot of, I could be wrong, but I think a lot of reasons that the offenses go fast now is because it does mask over for maybe a lack of talent or a lack of inexperience. That's kind of where the spread offense sort of started. How much do you think scheme-wise could help out this offensive line in run blocking and pass blocking? Because they were better a year ago from 2016 where they gave up, I think, 41 sacks and only averaged, I think, 80 yards rushing game. It was absolutely abysmal. But like you said, last year, they need to improve on that 122 yards per game rushing mark. And I think, what I said for a successful year for this offensive line, they can get to 150 yards per game rushing. And I speak for, I think, all South Carolina fans. They need to be better in short yardage situations because there was, a number of times where South Carolina would have 3rd and 1, 4th and 1, and just literally could not get a yard. Do you think the high tempo of the offense and the new scheme is going to help out that offensive line at all?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the big key, and it'll be interesting to watch with Bentley because he's not you don't think of him as a traditional run threat when it comes to being a quarterback, although we have seen him at times be willing to go out there and put his body on the line and pick up some yards. So I think it's going to be interesting to watch from a tempo standpoint. Does that mean like we're going to be watching some rhythm passing? We're going to get to see some shotgun and throw it on quick beats that's going to help the offensive line out. But I also think in that we go back to the run game, and with the run game, being able to give guys two-way goes, and that's a quarterback and a running back working together. So you're still gonna have to, you got to block zone. Doesn't matter if it's tempo or not. You got to block zone, and you got to block power, and you got to block a counter. You got to block all these things. And from a scheme standpoint, without a quarterback on a play in and play out basis working to manipulate linebackers, the offensive line's still going to have to do a lot of that heavy lifting in terms of moving guys around, although we'll see them work, jet action into things and plays off of that jet action. So you do have two options in the backfield that can work some of the cross gives where if one guy goes left, one guy goes right. Now you've got either a lead blocker or you have someone running off the backside of the zone instead of running it to the front side. So they have some of those little things that they can do to make it work. But same time, offensive line, they have to continue to improve. I know they got better a year ago. Now they have to continue to improve to where they become somewhat of a dominant force.
Absolutely. No, 100% agree. It's still a line of scrimmage league for sure, any level you play at. Sticking on the offensive side, Deebo Samuel. In your opinion, is he the most – he has to stay healthy, obviously. I think we know that. He's got to stay healthy for an entire season, something he just, to be honest, really has not been able to do since he came on to South Carolina. Yep. If he can stay healthy the entire season, do you think he's maybe the most explosive playmaker in college football?
I think he's one of them. Obviously, I think for North Carolina fans, Anthony Ratliff-Williams is that guy. I think if you're looking around the country – there are a couple other people that kind of fit into that same mold of just explosive playmaker. The key, though, again, you mentioned he's got to stay healthy. Like he's got to be healthy. He has to be on the field. That what they lose without him is this dynamism to turn every play into a home run. And when you don't have that, it makes it infinitely easier on the defense. And I think that's the thing we all kind of have to circle and look for is the fact that if you don't have like Brian Edwards, I think is a phenomenal every play wide receiver, a big body that can block people out and catch the football. But every play with him, you're not worried that someone misses a tackle and he's going to score a touchdown. Debo Samuel has that to his game, and the key is going to be being able to use that because if people are worried about him on every play, now you see things open for Shy, you see things open for Orchard, you see things open for Edwards, and that's the big part that I'm looking forward to. I think when you look at him in the offense and the scheme, he becomes one of those guys that you can work into the jet sweep. He becomes a guy that you can put into the backfield, recognize that a linebacker is going to have to try and cover him, and then you motion him out or you leave him in the backfield and let him run his route from the backfield so that he gets a mismatch and that mismatch can turn into a touchdown. So watching him be healthy is going to be absolutely critical for the South Carolina team.
Yeah, and I'm really excited to see how they use him in the new scheme. I mean, Jake Bentley at SEC Media Days referred to you might see Debo Samuel throwing a touchdown
Yeah.
pass. I mean, you never know how they're going to use him. I mean, maybe in a wildcat situation, but just being a threat on the outside, being a threat in special teams. Obviously, we saw what he did last year, which, in my opinion, with him going down, makes what South Carolina did during their season maybe even a little bit more impressive, not having their top guy on offense. Moving over to the defensive side, which I think is your specialty. The Gamecocks, and they lose Sky Moore, lose a couple other pieces on the defensive line. However, in my opinion, they return a ton of talented guys. TJ Brunson, Javon Kinlaw, who I think is going to be a freak this year at defensive tackle. South Carolina led the SEC in takeaways a year ago. Is it too much to ask that defense to do that again?
Yeah, because turnovers are luck a lot of times, and I think it's one of those things that on a very micro level, game to game, winning the turnover battle is something that you absolutely love. Like you're like, yeah, we won the turnover battle in this game because we forced X, Y, and Z. But I think over the course of a season, turnovers also boil down to luck. I mean, that's a quarterback, the ball slips out of his hands and goes backwards and you scoop it up. That's a fumble that, you didn't cause. The ball came out of the guy's hands, but it bounced the right way to your guy instead of right back to him. So I think there's a little bit of luck involved with turnovers, but when it does come to forcing turnovers, you still want to do all of those little things. And I think that means you have to strip, you have to read defense. I think the linebackers are going to be absolutely critical. Watching what is it, Danny Farrell and Fannell, and watching TJ Brunson, watching those guys read the quarterback to get into passing lanes, that's a turnover that you force. And I think those are the type of things that they're going to have to be good at this year to make sure that they get the ball out of the hand, out of the defense, out of the offense's hands. And I think the interesting part here, for me at least, from a defensive standpoint, is how are you going to get sacks? How are you going to get pressure on the quarterback? Because I look at the roster and there's not a part like DJ Wonham absolutely is a guy that can get pressure, but as a whole, those three guys, those four guys up front, I don't think that they are necessarily scary on a play in, play out basis, the way that you see at a place, whether it's Alabama or it's Ohio State or it's even USC now that they've got a healthy Porter Gustin. I don't know that you have that same fear. And so you're going to have to manufacture pressure. And that means blitzes, that means, zone blitzes, some sort of exotic pressures where you have, whether it's a safety or it's a nickel. And I'm very curious to watch Jamias Williams, to watch him get involved into some of that, because that's a way where you can create the opportunity for turnovers because of the element of surprise.
Yeah, and that's one guy I was definitely going to touch on next because I know you're obviously big into the secondary. I think you played what was it,
Safety,
cornerback
yeah.
or safety in college. Talk about your pride. I know Jamias Williams. I think I heard you talk about him last year. He's a guy you're really high on, and I mean obviously for good reasons. I mean there's questions in the South Carolina secondary, but one question there will not be is whether Jamias Williams will be on the field week one or not. Talk about just your impressions of him. And I mean, do you think he's kind of the next great defensive back, Will Muschamp defensive back that gets drafted to the NFL? Because the kid definitely he has raw talent for sure.
I absolutely love Jamias Williams. Like I have for goodness, years. Like this is a guy that I first saw him. I think he was a sophomore or a junior and I think he was a sophomore. Then I saw him again as a junior and got to spend a lot of time with him over the summer, over the summer at the opening, and he is just, I mean, good grief. I mean, he's a ball of energy. And he was one of those guys that I remember thinking he should be a 5-star. He's a 5-star player. He is one of the top 3 or 4 corners in this class. Why isn't he a 5-star? And we know why he wasn't a 5-star, because he wasn't as tall as you want your 5-star guy to be. But he's every ounce of him is a football player. And obviously, they're going to have him playing some of that safety position, playing some nickel, moving him around to places that are advantageous to them. And he just is so dynamic. I think he clears up, he plugs a lot of holes because of what he can do, which is everything. I think he's very similar to a guy, Duke Dawson, who played at Florida, that came in as a corner, played some safety, played some corner, played some nickel. I think he's very similar, maybe a little higher skill level even. But he absolutely can be another great Will Muschamp defensive back. He's a disruptor. He reads the quarterback well. He can play zone or man. This is a guy that's going to he makes everyone else's life in the back end much easier, because he's got the ability to do things that other guys just cannot do.
Yeah, I agree. And I think he's a guy that maybe not enough people are talking about, just how good he's going to be, because he is moving to a new position. I mean, do you think there's anything, because you do know the position, is there anything that he's going to need to work on or be better at, or something maybe that you're looking for or watching for specifically that, let's see how he reacts to that, or maybe something that he's going to find out, maybe something about playing that position that's going to be a little bit more difficult than playing like the traditional corner like he was last year? Do you think it'll be an easier transition for him?
Well, here's the thing. Ordinarily, when you talk about a corner moving to safety, I always wonder, how are they going to hold up? What's your durability going to look like? Because there's a lot more contact. There's a lot more involvement. You get into the interior of the defense. You play between the hashes. You got to come downhill and make plays. But he played a lot of nickel last year, and nickel is right there. That's right there with the linebackers. That's right there. You're 3 yards, 4 yards, 5 yards off the line of scrimmage. You go in and you make plays. So I think for him, that part is going to feel. I think it's going to feel very similar. I think the question mark moving to safety is going to be, how does he handle maybe not being as close to the action, because the safety is going to be, there are going to be times where he's going to be off the ball, not just off the ball, but like 15 yards off the ball and then moving back to 30 as the play happens, and how he handles that. The big key is going to be, it's okay if you're not in on the action. It means everybody else is doing the right thing. And I think as a guy that played safety and played combo safety, strong and free, I think basically in today's game, you have to be able to play strong and free. You have to do that because of all the way people motion and the way they come out in different formations and the shifts. You got to be able to do both. I think that there can be a tendency to let those eyes get lost in the backfield, even a little bit, I'll say it, a little bit of boredom. If a couple plays go by and you're not even close to being in on the tackle because you're farther off the ball, I think that's going to be interesting, because they can also get you at that with play action. If your eyes are in the backfield looking to go make a play, then you're not doing your job, and then they can get behind you. So I think for him, it's just going to be all about doing his job. He's fully capable of doing this job. It's certainly something that suits him just fine. I think he really will enjoy his new role in the action, and they can still use him at nickel all the time whenever they want. So I think it's going to be very interesting. But for me, I think that not being as involved at times can be a little bit frustrating, but I think he's going to find a way to make that work.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm definitely excited to see it. I mean, South Carolina fans, I think, got their first glimpse of how special he could be, or kind of just a look at his talent when, I just remember specifically the Missouri game when Drew Lock thinks he has a man wide open in the flat, and Jamias Williams with that breakaway speed. Felt like he came out of nowhere, picked the ball off, and you're thinking, wow, this kid can move a little bit. So it'll be a lot of fun to watch. Jumping into the schedule a little bit, there's a lot of talk about that week 2 matchup, South Carolina, Georgia, and Williams-Brice, 3:30 kickoff. There's going to be obviously a ton of hype, around that game. It may be 2 ranked teams going against each other, kind of depending how the AP poll plays out, leading up into the season. I saw an interesting poll on Twitter today, and I kind of just want to get your feedback, because South Carolina's 2 biggest rivals are Georgia and Clemson. I think that's pretty fair statement to make. South Carolina hasn't beaten either of those teams since 2014 when they beat Georgia 35. I think it was 38-35 in Williams-Brice Stadium. Do you think they have a chance? Because that's definitely the two biggest bears on their schedule, by far the two best teams. Do you think they have a chance to finally break that streak this year? And then just looking at the week 2 matchup, how excited are you for that game? And do you think South Carolina can pull the upset in Columbia?
I'm very excited for the game itself. As far as can they pull it off? I mean, let's not. I mean, they lost by 2 touchdowns last year to Georgia, and by 3, almost 4 touchdowns last year to Clemson. I think the Georgia one is a little more interesting to me because Georgia's a very good football team, but Georgia has a football coach that's a lot more comfortable winning games. You know, he's a lot more comfortable playing 24-10 football games. He's very comfortable. He'd love. I think Kirby Smart is very much like Nick Saban, is very much like Will Muschamp, with the idea of if I can just win this thing 7-0, I'll be fine. That's what I would love to do. So I think that Georgia, if we're going to pick one of those two teams, I think Georgia's probably the one, even though they play for a national championship. The reality is, I don't think that they have the step on the gasness that Clemson has in terms of using their weapons to go out and score points. Clemson's a football team that, as good as their defense is, they're so offensively motivated because of the mentality of their head football coach. And I think for Georgia going into this football game, I think the key is going to be what's happening at the quarterback spot, right? Like South Carolina knows who their quarterback's going to be. I think for South Carolina to win this football game, it'll take a little bit of Georgia still trying to figure out exactly who they are. And are we a Jake Fromm-led football team? Are we a Justin Fields-led football team? Are we still playing? It's the second game of the season. Are we still playing 2 quarterbacks to try and figure this out? Does one of them make a mistake pressing? I think that's the opportunity that South Carolina needs. It's going to be interesting to see. I think Georgia still, in my mind, has an edge in this football game, but I certainly believe that South Carolina has an opportunity. Georgia's going to have to help them out in terms of being able to take advantage of it.
Yeah, and I agree. And I would say, just from an objective standpoint, I definitely think Georgia is still a more talented football team, obviously, but it's going to be kind of one of those games, like you mentioned earlier, talking about the turnovers. It's going to be kind of one of those games where you get maybe, a fluky, I don't want to say fluky, but a fluky turnover, kind of a lucky turnover, if you will.
It's okay to call them flukes. Like, we've built this whole thing in our mind about turnovers being something that a team can control, but the reality is a lot of turnovers are completely uncontrollable.
Right. No, 100%. What I was going to say is getting kind of maybe off of South Carolina a little bit, but it does relate to the game. I obviously have a lot of buddies who are Georgia fans. And a lot of them are very, very excited about Justin Fields. And I had a Georgia friend of mine bring this up to me. He said, what if in that first game, and Georgia plays Austin Peay, it's going to be a breeze. They're not going to have a problem with it. But he just said, just imagine this, Chris. What if Jake Fromm and the offense go out there, maybe they go 3 and out their first 3 drives. Who knows what happens? Maybe he throws a pick and Justin Fields goes out there and looks like a world beater. Yeah. I mean, do you really think that's something that could realistically happen? And do you really realistically think that there could be some sort of a quarterback controversy coming into week 2? Because in my opinion, it sounds ridiculous. I mean, Jake Fromm led you to the national title game, but obviously with the way freshman quarterbacks come in now, there's always competition. You see it at Alabama, you're seeing it at Georgia. Heck, you're even seeing it at Clemson. I mean, do you think that's something that could be a real storyline going in that game? Because in my opinion, if it is, that's going to be a huge upside for South Carolina.
Yeah, I absolutely believe it is. Justin Fields is the best quarterback I've seen probably since Josh Rosen. And obviously that's only like a 3-4 year window, but we are talking about a kid and he's realistically, Rosen more advanced from a understanding, like not even really more advanced. Justin Fields, I think coming out, I feel more highly about him than I felt about Rosen. I knew Rosen was very good, but I also knew how good Rosen would be based upon some physical limitations. Justin Fields is already as good as Rosen could ever be, and I think he can only get better. So the kid is really good. And keep in mind, when you talk about leading a team to a national championship or playing for a national, that's what Jalen Hurts did. And it took a while, but Tua, I remember saying, listen, Tua's going to be the starter for this team. I don't care if Hurts has to transfer or if he gets injured. Tua's going to find a way on the football field, and he's not coming off it. And I think Fields is the same way. The best thing that Fromm can do is do everything right, which leads to playing a little tight, leads to some interceptions, or leads to a fumble because you're so, I can't mess up, that you mess up. And so certainly he can feel him breathing on his neck coming for that job. And I don't think Georgia's going to just give the job to Fields. I think he's going to have to take it, but I think he's fully capable of doing that.
Right. And yeah, like I was, yeah, actually, when you were talking, I just realized, I mean, last year, Jake Fromm, a freshman, led Georgia to the national title game. So it's not
Yeah,
absolutely unheard of for a true freshman to just
right.
take over like that over a
And
more veteran QB.
he took over for, it was a light injury, but once he got on the field, there was no taking him off. And I think that's a situation that Fields finds himself in, and he certainly believes that he should be the starter, and we'll see how it works out.
Absolutely, absolutely. I know everybody's really excited. I want to move into recruiting just a little bit before we finish up here because I know recruiting is kind of your sweet spot. It's a huge part of what you do. Talk about just the South Carolina 2019 class. I mean, obviously, I think it's shaping up pretty well right now. You've got Ryan Helinski, the quarterback, who we just had on our show a couple of days ago. You got Zach Pickens, the defensive end. A couple other guys shaping up. I mean, I've heard some people say that this could potentially be, I mean, without a doubt, Will Muschamp's best class at South Carolina, but one of the best maybe in school history. What's your take and just kind of how do you see the class playing out for South Carolina?
Got to get to the finish line, and I think that's the big key. I think when you look at Zach Pickens is from Hannah High School. He's a guy that absolutely fits that 5-star mold. He can come off the edge and make plays. I think he's a perfect fit for Will Muschamp because he's a guy that can play that 5 technique and still get pressure. Like, I don't think he's a stand-up buck type player. I think he's someone that plays a 5 technique. He probably ends up playing at 275, maybe 280. He's 6'5". He's got long arms. He's got an opportunity to be a complete disruptor in that defensive scheme, and that's certainly something to get excited about. Helinski is very good. Like, he's one of those. He's built to be a quarterback. Like, he's done all the stuff that I mentioned Rosen earlier. I mentioned Fields, but he's done all that stuff. He's done all the, whether we're talking about, like the quarterback camps and the quarterback coach, he's done all that stuff. Same with Bentley. Like, he's that type of a quarterback. And then when you start to go down the list, I think Jamario Holly is another one. He's from right up the road in Rock Hill. That's not too far from me here in Charlotte. Actually looking forward to getting a chance to see him play if I can this season. He's a wide receiver that's super dynamic. I think his speed is just absolutely off the charts and has the ability to make contested catches, which is what you want to see out of a guy that's, right around or right under 6 feet tall. And so they've got a lot of good talent on the high side. And then they've got developmental players like Jamar Brown from St. Thomas Aquinas. And the cool thing with him is, look, I get it. He's only like 200 pounds, but he plays at St. Thomas. And St. Thomas Aquinas is a school that is built to play football. So you're getting a guy that's going to need some development physically. Like, he's going to have to add some weight, but he knows what he's doing on the football field. And that's one of those things that I absolutely freaking love about recruiting a place like St. Thomas Aquinas, they've got 1 million kids that go out and play D1, and they're all well coached and they're all well taught, and they all come in and they're ready to grind. He understands the work that it takes because of the way their football program is built. So that's something to definitely get excited about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm looking forward to it. And I agree with you. I think it's one of those things where we saw yesterday with, I think it was Trayvon Walker, the D lineman. You're not going to win every single battle you go up against in those, with the big boys, with Georgia, with Clemson, Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like South Carolina is maybe getting in some conversations they weren't a couple years ago with some players. And I think they're starting to actually win a couple battles. Maybe they weren't winning a couple of years ago. So I think it's, in my opinion, I think it's something South Carolina fans should definitely be excited about. And it's kind of a testament to, the job that Will Muschamp sort of promised he would do when he got here, is that he would hit the road and, be a strong recruiter. And I think without a doubt he's done that.
Yeah, man, he's on the road. I know he's in Charlotte all the time. Like, he's in, when you're in Charlotte, that means you could be anywhere from going to Rock Hill all the way up to Cabarrus County. Obviously, that they like to get into North Carolina and snatch some players away. Rick Sandage, last year's top guy, he's from right up the road in Concord. So absolutely, watching him get those things done is really exciting because he builds good football players, and I think that's something that can't be understated. The fact is that if you go play football, especially defense for Will Muschamp, he's going to make sure that you know how to play real ball. He's going to make sure you're not just an athlete running around. You understand how all the pieces fit, where you fit into that puzzle, and the best way to get things done. So absolutely exciting. And hopefully they just close strong. You got the 2 signing days now in December and then again in February. Like, it's just a matter of closing strong and holding everybody else off.
Absolutely, absolutely. So before I get you out here, Michael, one last question. I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. Looking at the 2018 South Carolina Gamecocks at their overall season, Vegas has got them over under 7.5, I believe, right now. Just taking a look at the team and that schedule, where do you see South Carolina finishing the 2018 season?
All right, so let's go through this. I think they win week 1, so that's 1 win. I'm going to say lose to Georgia. They're going to beat Marshall. That's 2. Beat Vandy. That's 3. Beat Kentucky. That's 4. Beat Mizzou. That's 5. We're already at 5 wins right now, and then the rest of that schedule, I think they beat A&M. They're playing at home. That's 6 wins. Beat Tennessee is 7. Beat Ole Miss is 8. I think Florida's an interesting one, so let's give them a loss to Florida on the road. And then let's give them a win against Chattanooga and a loss to Clemson. So what does that add up to? 9-3 with a bowl game? That's not bad.
Yeah. And that's where I've got them too right now. I mean, obviously, I think the ball could bounce either way to where they could be 8-4, or they could even be 10-2. But I think right now, I think that's a safe pick with 9-3. And I had this conversation with good buddy of yours, Barrett Salee, a couple months ago. He came on the show and. We were talking about the schedule too, and I basically told Barrett, I said, listen, if you look at a single South Carolina fan, they tell you they wouldn't be happy with a 9-win season when it's only happened 7 times in school history. They're lying to you. So,
9-3 with a bowl game and a chance to win 10 games. I think that's outstanding from where they were during a season where the head coach just quit in the middle of the year.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I know everybody's going to be excited to watch, and obviously you'll be covering it all. I know, as we've talked before, kind of off air, your Saturday's about to get real busy, so man, it's gonna be a lot of fun. But hey, we appreciate you having on. Let everybody know where they can see your work now and where they can find you on social media and everything.
Yeah, on social, you can find me on Twitter at In the Bleachers, INTHEBLEACHRS, at In the Bleachers. I use Instagram, but I don't use it for like football or for work. It's just
delicious
for
food, though. Delicious food. I've seen it.
That's at It's Felder, ITSFELDER. And then for me, it's cat's out of the bag. I have a new job. I'm working with Stadium. It's you can follow Stadium on Twitter at Watch Stadium. You can download the app, the Stadium app on your phone. They broadcast games, so they have a bunch of the Mountain West games that they'll run through the platform. A bunch of Conference USA games they'll run through the platform. High school games as well, so you get to see some of the recruits that actually get out there and play. And I'm going to be doing some live video for Stadium. We're going to do a 30-minute college show. We're going to talk about everything college football all across the country. And then I'm going to do also a high school show where we're going to get into recruiting and really dig into where guys are going. What does their future look like? Where do they fit on the depth chart? So very much excited to do that. And again, that's at Watch Stadium on Twitter, and download it in the App Store. You'll be getting a bunch of content.
Yeah, for sure. Everybody tune in. I know we will. But that's going to wrap us up again. If you haven't done so, be sure to rate, subscribe, share, and download the Spurs Up Show on iTunes, the Stitcher app, wherever you consume your podcasts. Also, check us out on all our social media handles, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and, of course, armchairamericans.com. So for Michael Felder, Thomas Floyd, I'm Chris Phillips. We appreciate you guys tuning in, and we'll catch you next time on the next episode of the Spurs Up Show.